Hello and welcome to BYJU'S IAS. Let's take up the analysis of today's The Hindu newspaper. The Ministry of Defence has come out with the draft Defence Procurement Procedure in order to replace the Defence Procurement Procedure of 2016. The draft policy has been placed in the public domain in order to invite suggestions from the industry, and once it is notified, it will come into effect from the 1st of April 2020. See, the main objective of the Defence Procurement Procedure is to promote the modernization of the Indian Armed Forces by streamlining the procurement of weapons and defence equipment. But since India's domestic defence manufacturers are not able to meet the demands of the armed forces, India ends up importing most of the defence equipment. So the Defence Procurement Procedure tries to strike a balance between the importing of weapons from foreign vendors and the indigenous development of weapons by the domestic defence manufacturers under the Make in India initiative. So its underlying objective is to promote the growth of India's domestic defence sector through greater indigenization and research and development. Currently, weapons and defence equipment are procured for the Indian Armed Forces as per the rules that have been laid out under the Defence Procurement Procedure of 2016. Under this policy, procurement has been categorized into three main categories, that is buy and make, and make. The first five categories have been arranged in the order of priority that has been given by the Defence Procurement Procedure. So kindly note this down, this can be very important for prelims. It means that buy Indian designed, developed and manufactured category has been given the highest priority, whereas buy global category has been given the lowest priority. See, the buy category has been further divided into three subcategories. First, we have buy Indian designed, developed and manufactured, or buy IDDM. Then we have buy Indian and buy global. See, buy means that the defense equipment is being directly bought from a vendor. In the case of buy IDDM, the defense equipment is being directly procured from an Indian vendor who has indigenously designed, developed and manufactured the product. In the case of Buy Indian, the defense equipment is being procured directly from an Indian vendor who may have tied up with a foreign vendor and partially developed and manufactured the equipment in India. And in the case of Buy Global, the defense equipment is directly procured from a foreign vendor and no Indian vendors are involved. Then under the Buy and Make category, a few numbers of the defense equipment are directly bought from the vendor, and the rest are manufactured in India through transfer of technology. For example, let's say India is looking to buy around 100 fighter jets. If it is procured under the buy and make category, around 20 fighter jets might be directly procured from the vendor, and the rest 80 would be manufactured in India itself through transfer of technology. This buy and make category is further subdivided into buy and make Indian and buy and make. Under the first category, the defense equipment is procured from a strategic partnership involving an Indian vendor and a foreign vendor. Under this strategic partnership model, a few numbers of the equipment that has been manufactured by a foreign vendor in a foreign country is directly imported. And for the rest, the foreign vendor has to transfer the technology to the Indian vendor, who in turn makes the defense equipment in India itself. The next category, that is buy and make, is quite similar to this category, and the only difference is that the strategic partnership between the Indian vendor and the foreign vendor is established after the deal has been signed. That is, after the deal has been signed, the foreign vendor then selects an Indian vendor. The best example for the buy and make category would be the procurement of the Rafale fighter jets from France. This procurement deal was signed with Dassault Aviation, and later Dassault Aviation has picked Reliance Defence as its strategic partner. Then under the make category, there are no foreign vendors involved, and the government is looking to promote indigenization under this category. But the draft Defence Procurement Procedure has been proposed to replace the Defence Procurement Procedure of 2016. Under the proposed policy, the 6 existing categories of procurement has been retained, and it proposes to introduce 2 new categories known as the lease category and buy global, manufacture in India with minimum 50% indigenization. Under the lease category, the defense equipment would be leased either from an Indian vendor or from a global vendor. So the lease category has been further subdivided into two subcategories. But leasing of defense equipment generally applies for non-warfare equipment which is used for training and logistics. Leasing generally does not include weapons that can be used in warfare, and it is used for the procurement of non-warfare equipment such as trainers, simulators, transport fleets, etc. One example for India leasing defense equipment from a foreign country is when India signed a deal with Russia to lease INS Chakra, which is a nuclear-powered submarine, in order to train the soldiers of the Indian Navy in the operation of nuclear-powered submarines such as INS Arihant. Under this leasing contract, Russia's condition was that INS Chakra can be used only for training purposes and it cannot be used in combat or in war. Apart from the introduction of these two new procurement categories, the draft procedure has also proposed to increase the indigenous content by 10% in all the categories. Then it also talks about the inclusion of after-sales support in the capital acquisition contract itself. See, procurement of weapons and defense platforms falls under capital acquisition for the armed forces. Generally, when the initial capital acquisition contract is signed, it does not cover after-sales support such as life cycle support, comprehensive maintenance, etc. When a new weapon or a defense platform is acquired, it generally comes with a warranty of only few years. Under the current capital acquisition contract, after-sales support extending to the entire life cycle of the equipment is not covered. So the draft policy proposes to introduce after-sales support into the capital acquisition contract itself. Now let's take up the editorial Crime and Punishment from page number 10. Yesterday we discussed that the convicts in the Nirbhaya gang rape case were finally hanged. The execution of this death penalty is being celebrated across the country, and it is being said that finally justice has been delivered to the victim, to the victim's family, and as well as to the society. It is also being said that the execution of the death penalty would set an example and it would deter future crimes against women. So in the context of this argument, the editorial is trying to evaluate whether this argument is valid and are there any better alternatives. The question in front of us is whether death penalty the only way to deliver justice to the victim and her family. And the more important question is, will death penalty really help in deterring crimes against women? To answer these questions, we need to look at the recommendations of the Justice J.S. Verma Committee. Yesterday we had discussed that the gang rape and murder of Nirbhaya had sent a shock wave across the country and it led to massive protests. In the backdrop of these protests, the government decided to set up the Justice J.S. Verma Committee to provide for recommendations for reforming the legal and the criminal system in order to promote the safety and security of women. The recommendations of the J.S. Verma Committee led to the introduction of the Criminal Law Amendment Act of 2013, and it not only provided stricter punishment for rapes and crimes against women, but it also made the legal and the criminal system more victim-centric and victim-friendly. But the editorial points out that a number of key recommendations of the Justice J.S. Verma Committee were ignored by the government. The Justice J.S. Verma Committee went beyond its mandate and it recommended the inclusion of marital rapes as a criminal offense. Even though marital rapes are an unfortunate reality, the government chose to ignore this recommendation by citing the complexities involved in proving marital rapes. The J.S. Verma Committee had also recommended wide-sweeping police reforms in order to make the police force more victim-friendly and also to promote the effectiveness of the police during investigation, forensics, evidence collection, prosecution, etc. But these recommendations were conveniently ignored by the government, and we should also remember that the agenda of police reforms has been kept pending for more than 45 years. Then the J.S. Verma Committee had also recommended the introduction of changes to the Armed Forces Special Powers Act in order to cover rapes that might have been committed by Indian soldiers who are deployed in disturbed areas. But these recommendations were also ignored by citing national security concerns. But the most important recommendation of the committee which was ignored was its stand against capital punishment for rape. The committee had argued that the provision of death penalty for rape could turn out to be counterproductive, and instead it had recommended rigorous imprisonment for life. So let us understand the position taken by the J.S. Verma Committee against death penalty by looking at three key points. See, as we discussed earlier, we generally believe that death penalty serves as a strong deterrent against future crimes. But this assumption of ours is not supported by available evidence. Evidence available from around the world shows that death penalty doesn't really serve as a deterrent against future crimes. The data provided by India's National Crime Records Bureau shows that crimes against women and rapes have actually increased over the last 7 years, even after the provision of death penalty was introduced by the stringent Criminal Law Amendment Act in 2013. The other argument for death penalty is that it provides a sense of justice by bringing closure to the victim, to the victim's family, and as well as to the society. This argument is definitely valid because the execution of the convict can help in healing the trauma that has been suffered by the victim and her family. But if you look at the legal complications involved in the execution of a death penalty, it becomes clear that there is a never-ending delay in the execution of death penalties, and this long wait for justice causes further trauma to the victim and her family. So the delays in the execution of the death penalty causes a further delay in bringing closure to the victim, and as the popular saying goes, justice delayed is justice denied. So the unnecessary delay in delivering justice makes the victim believe that justice has been denied to her. So instead, the best way to provide closure to the victim is by delivering swift and strict punishment. And for this to happen, we need wide-sweeping police and legal reforms. These reforms should make the police more victim-friendly during investigation. It should make them more effective in forensics and collection of evidence. Then on the legal side, the prosecution has to fast-track the case, and special courts have to be constituted, where swift hearings can be held, which would result in the delivery of the strictest of punishments to the accused. That is, of course, if the accused is proven guilty. And the responsibility of proving him guilty lies on the police. Through effective investigation and scientific collection of evidence, the police have to convince the judiciary that the accused is guilty of his crime, and if this entire process is done in a time-bound manner, it will result in the delivery of swift punishment, which will actually bring a sense of justice and a sense of closure to the victim. Then the final argument against death penalty is based around the debate between retributive justice and reformative justice. See, in a modern civilized society, the provision of death penalty is seen as a form of retribution, because available evidence shows that it neither delivers a true sense of justice to the victim, nor does it have a deterrent effect. That's the reason why capital punishment has been abolished in a number of modern liberal societies, such as West European countries. So in a modern democracy, reformative justice is advocated in the place of retributive justice in order to provide a chance to reform not just the criminal, but the society as well. Because at the end of the day, every criminal is a byproduct of his environment. And this argument is very, very true for the Indian society and the crimes that are committed against women in the Indian society. Studies have shown that the patriarchal nature of the Indian society and the preference given to the male child in the Indian society is the very root cause of mistreatment of women in India. It is this nature of the Indian society which encourages a few Indian men to mistreat women and treat them as an inferior gender. So in conclusion, if we have to deliver true justice to victims of rape, and if we have to deter crimes against women and promote the safety and security of women, then we need to deliver swift justice that is based on reformative justice and promote the progressive modernization of the Indian society, which can bring an end to this patriarchy. Now let's take up a column written by Captain Gopinath, in which he explains that when humanity is faced with an existential crisis, it provides us an opportunity to create a level playing field by erasing our inequalities and differences, and use this opportunity to promote unity and humanity in the larger interest of mankind. This column has been written in the context of the ongoing coronavirus pandemic. The argument of the writer is that whenever humanity is faced with an existential crisis, due to disasters such as pandemics, earthquakes, tsunamis, or wars, there can be two possible outcomes. One, a society facing an existential crisis can rip itself apart due to its inequalities and differences. Or, a society can unite behind a common cause by erasing its inequalities and differences. But the writer makes use of references from literature and history to argue that an existential crisis provides an opportunity to erase inequalities and promote unity, and he says that an existential crisis can act as a great leveler in an unequal society. To justify this argument, he refers to literary works such as the famous Kannada novel Samskara, written by Jnanapith awardee U.R. Anantmurthy. And he also refers to the popular novel The Plague, written by Albert Camus. In both the novels, the authors are illustrating how the caste and religious divides are opened up when a society is facing an existential crisis due to a pandemic. During such crisis, we find that the narrow-minded and the greedy, irrespective of their caste or religion, they try to exploit these divides for their own benefit. It is this behavior by a few which causes a society to rip apart when faced with an existential crisis. And at the same time, we see that the broad-minded and the selfless step up to the challenge and work towards a common good by erasing the caste and religious inequalities. This is when a society can unite even during the times of an existential crisis. It is not just literature, but even our history offers us the same lessons. If you look at the existential crisis faced by the Jews under Nazi Germany and under the dictatorship of Stalin, or the existential crisis faced by Sikhs, Hindus and Muslims during the partition of India and Pakistan, or if you look at communal riots or civil wars or natural disasters around the world, you will come across the same analogy. Even during such instances of human suffering, you will find that there are always a few narrow, greedy-minded people who would be exploiting the divides in the society. But in the end, the existential crisis will act as a leveler, and it will create an opportunity for the broad-minded and the selfless to work towards a common good. And this results in the society uniting behind a common cause, irrespective of its inequalities or differences. So one should hope to see the same result during the ongoing coronavirus pandemic as well. Next, we have an editorial on page number 10, which evaluates the Prime Minister's speech on the coronavirus pandemic, and it calls upon all the political parties in India to unite and jointly fight against this fast-spreading pandemic. But we have already analyzed the Prime Minister's speech in our yesterday's analysis, so there is no need to discuss this editorial again. But I would request you to go through the editorial once, which could help in revising the key points that were highlighted by the Prime Minister. Next, on the same page, we have a column dealing with the economic impact of COVID-19. In previous sessions, we have discussed the economic impact of COVID-19 on the Indian economy and as well as on the global economy in detail. But in this column, the writer is offering a few possible solutions that need to be implemented by the Indian government. Since the coronavirus outbreak has threatened millions of workers in the informal sector, such as cab drivers, waiters, mall workers, domestic help, etc., the writer is suggesting that the government should provide for direct cash transfers in order to compensate for their loss of income. The writer says that such cash transfers could be easily implemented by making use of the infrastructure provided by the Pradhan Mantri Jan Dhan Yojana, the Aadhaar, and the public distribution system. In fact, such cash transfers have already been announced by the government of Hong Kong and the United States. So it is high time for the Indian government to offer similar assistance to the workers in its informal sector. The next biggest impact of the pandemic has been on industries, especially service industries such as airlines, hotels, restaurants, tourism industry, etc. The travel restrictions and the lockdowns are not only affecting their flow of revenue, but it is also affecting their ability to honor their commitments such as payment of salaries, loan repayments, etc. So to ensure adequate liquidity for these companies, the government should come out with a loan guarantee scheme by announcing an economic aid package. In fact, France and Spain have already announced such aid packages amounting to 300 billion euros and 100 billion euros respectively, and India needs to learn a lesson from this. The next biggest impact of the pandemic would be felt by individuals and smaller businesses who might find it difficult to repay their loans. Especially the salaried class and small businessmen might find it difficult to repay their loans due to salary cuts, loss of job, or loss of revenue. So in order to protect them, the government needs to announce a mortgage holiday which would discount them from paying their EMIs for a few months, and such a scheme has already been announced by the government of Italy. So this is something India needs to replicate to protect its salaried class and smaller businessmen. But of course, financing such massive schemes would not be possible through the budget, and hence the government and the financial institutions, they need to get creative and they need to come out with extra budgetary support. The writer suggests that the government can come out with a well-structured, tax-efficient bond which can tap into the large pool of domestic savings in order to raise the required resources. The government should consider raising resources through its strong and successful diaspora community as well, and there is even a precedent available for this. When India carried out the Pokhran nuclear tests in 1998, the United States had placed economic sanctions on India. These American sanctions were stifling the Indian economy, and then the government of India came out with a creative solution, and it made use of the SBI to raise around $4 billion in revenue from non-resident Indians. So such creative financing options would have to be considered in order to support these massive economic aid packages that are very much needed to blunt the economic impact of COVID-19. Now let's take up the practice questions. Which of the following statements are correct? Wildlife SOS is a UN agency working in the field of wildlife conservation. Wildlife SOS works in collaboration with the Government of India's Project Elephant. Amongst the given statements, the first statement is incorrect. So option B is the right answer. See, Wildlife SOS is a NGO that is based out of India. It is not a UN agency. It's a very popular NGO working in the field of wildlife conservation and environment protection. It regularly collaborates with the Government of India to conserve a number of threatened species such as the elephant, the sloth bear, leopard, tiger, crocodiles, etc. Now let's take up the next practice question. Which of the following statements are correct? The Indian leopard is protected under Schedule 1 of the Wildlife Protection Act of 1972. It is also listed as vulnerable under the IUCN Red Data List. Both the statements are correct. Option C is the right answer. These two questions were asked because of this article on page number 7. According to this article, a leopard has been rescued by the Maharashtra Forest Department by working along with Wildlife SOS. Now let's take up the next practice question. Which of the following statements are correct? During public health emergencies, state governments are empowered to enforce quarantine and isolation. Those who jump quarantine and violate the restrictions, they can be charged under the Indian Penal Code. Both the statements are correct. Option C is the right answer. This question has been asked because according to this article on page number 8, 4 people who had been placed under mandatory quarantine by the Kerala government managed to escape from the quarantine facility, and later they have been arrested and they have been charged on the account of negligence under the Indian Penal Code, Kerala Police Act, and as well as the Kerala Public Health Act. Now let's take up the next practice question. Which of the following statements are correct? The Nirbhaya Fund provides for a non-lapsable corpus fund for safety and security of women. It is administered by the Ministry of Women and Child Development. Various ministries can propose projects to use this fund with a view to enhance the safety and security of women in the country. Amongst the given statements, the second statement is incorrect because the Nirbhaya Fund, which was set up in 2013, it is administered by the Department of Economic Affairs under the Ministry of Finance. So the correct answer is option D, 1 and 3 only. Now let's take up the next practice question. Which of the following statements are correct? Mahanadi Coalfields Limited is one of the largest private coal producing companies in the country. It is one of the subsidiaries of Coal India Limited. Amongst the given statements, the first statement is incorrect. So option B is the right answer. See, Mahanadi Coalfields Limited is indeed one of the largest coal producing companies in India, but it is not a private firm. It is a public sector unit. It is one of the subsidiaries of Coal India Limited. This question has been asked because according to this article on page number 12, the CBI has booked 4 former officials of Mahanadi Coalfields for their involvement in a corruption case. Now let's take up the next practice question. Which of the following statements are correct? Vehicles which can fly at more than 5 times the speed of sound are referred to as hypersonic vehicles. Countries are pursuing the development of hypersonic missiles as they are capable of defeating most of the existing missile defense systems. United States, China and Russia have already demonstrated this technology. All the 3 statements are correct. Option D is the right answer. See, hypersonic missiles can fly at more than 5 times the speed of sound, that is at speeds greater than Mach 5. This tremendous speed gives them the ability to defeat most of the existing missile defense systems, and they can carry both nuclear and conventional warheads. That's the reason why major military powers, including India, are pursuing the development of hypersonic vehicles, because they offer tremendous advantages over ballistic missiles and cruise missiles. But till date, only 3 countries have demonstrated this technology, that is the United States, China and Russia. This question has been asked because according to this article on page number 14, the United States has successfully tested a hypersonic missile which has been named as the C-HGB. In December 2019, Russia had announced that it has already deployed its Avangard hypersonic missile system. In October 2019, China had displayed its hypersonic missile named as DF-17 during a military parade. Now let's take up the next practice question. The World Happiness Report is published by the United Nations Sustainable Development Solutions Network. Option C is the right answer. This question has been asked because the World Happiness Report for 2020 has been published, and this report, which covers 156 countries, is based on the Happiness Index, which is measured using parameters such as the GDP of the country, the extent of social support provided by the government, the extent of personal freedom enjoyed by the citizens, and the levels of corruption witnessed in the country. In this year's report, Finland and Denmark have occupied the top spots, whereas Zimbabwe, South Sudan and Afghanistan have been ranked at the bottom of the list. Now let's take up a practice question from the 2017 prelims paper. Consider the following statements. The nationwide soil health card scheme aims at expanding the cultivable area under irrigation, enabling the banks to assess the quantum of loans to be granted to farmers on the basis of soil quality, checking the overuse of fertilizers in farmlands. See, the main objective of the soil health card scheme is to assess the nutrient quality in the soil and suggest the suitable application of fertilizers. So the only correct statement is statement 3, and hence the correct answer is option B. Finally, let's take up a couple of mains practice questions. The first question, a society that prefers a male child has already condemned its women to an unequal world. Evaluate. The second question, an existential crisis can either bring a society together or rip it apart. Discuss in the context of COVID-19 pandemic. Kindly write an answer to these questions and post them in the comment section below. So this concludes our discussion for the day. Thanks for watching.